And I'll just let me know. Looks like okay. Looks like we're recording. So welcome everyone to week 8. I'm a little tired today because I stayed up till about 1 o'clock reading your special projects, and I'm usually in bed by 11, but I was just thrilled and really engaged. So thank you so much for posting those and for putting your effort towards sharing. Some of you created some unique models, which were just so exciting to see. But tonight we have a guest speaker, and it is Dr. Shelly Kirkpatrick. I met Shelly, I think it was about 5 years ago when I was working as a consultant at Management Concepts. And Shelly's team, Shelly is the Director of Assessments, and her team supported the instructional design staff with creating surveys. And she has this very down-to-earth style, and she'd invite me into her office when she would preview questions that I had put together that were not exactly ready for the client. And you know, we sat in her office one day, and she explained to me that a Likert scale is not a 5-question survey, that it's really about agreement or disagreement to a question. And so I decided that Shelly would make a great presenter in my class when we talked about surveys, because she has always been my go-to resource, and her team at Management Concepts was always very helpful. Now that I'm independent, I often say I wish I had Shelly's team almost on every client site, because they're just a huge help. And when she's not in the office, she is practicing her Taekwondo, and she is a black belt. I remember I'd see her in the office, and even when she was injured and on crutches, she was still competing. So she's a warrior both in the on the mats. So Shelly is currently the current president of ISPI, and it is just an honor for us to have her speak with us tonight. So Shelly, we're ready to have you take us on a lap around the track.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening on this rainy Tuesday. It looks like it's raining where I am. I'm getting a little feedback. If you're having trouble hearing, just type a message in the chat box. Or, of course, if you have questions, type a message in the chat box, and we'll probably open up the phone lines at some point. So
yeah, if you're not speaking, maybe you could mute your phone line.
Yeah, that helps a lot. Great, that sounds better already. So Catherine was nice enough to share your profiles with me, so that was really informative. That helps give me a sense for what your backgrounds are. And just to share a little bit about me, and I'll pass these slides along to Catherine so she can share them with you. Here's a little bit about my background. Catherine already mentioned some of it. And I think my most favorite thing to talk about is Taekwondo. And I'm taking my master's exam for a 4th degree black belt on December 13th. So I hope my old arthritic knees hold out just another couple months. But in my role at Management Concepts, I do a lot of work on client projects. So we do a lot of competency modeling and competency assessment. And what we do is try to figure out where a workforce has skills gaps or competency gaps, and then our training divisions figure out how to fill those gaps. And we do a lot of internal work too, so things that aren't for paying clients, but things that we need to do to run an effective company. So those are customer satisfaction surveys and various surveys. Sometimes they're marketing surveys, sometimes we survey our instructors because we want to make sure that we're supporting them and doing a good job as well. So a variety of different surveys. And we also, of course, do a lot of training evaluation for external clients as well as for our open enrollment classes. So I'll be pulling from all types of examples this evening. All right. So if you can, in the chat box, just type in, what your experiences are with surveys, if you've ever written one, and if so, what was easy about it, what was hard about it. While you're doing that, I'll just sort of talk about different types of assessment. I tend to make a distinction between a survey, which is really to gather somebody's opinions, and an assessment, which is more of a competency assessment, and then a test, which is like a multiple choice knowledge test. And that's just what I tend to do. I don't think there's any conventions about that, but it tends to help me just sort of make things clear, and when I talk about these things with my team and with folks around the office. Here's some responses coming in. Trying to skim through them in this little chat box here. Oh, we've got folks who've done some training evaluation. That's great. No experience. Great, so a range of experience. Keep typing in if you haven't had a chance yet. And I also got the questions you sent, and you guys have really great questions. And I made some notes on my hard copy here to make sure I answer your questions. But again, feel free to ask questions as we go along. And when we get to the end, we'll have some time. And if I didn't answer your question or you have another question, just ask. I tend to think about surveys as those three types. A knowledge test, if you have a training evaluation background, that's level 2. That's did you learn anything or did the student learn anything? And that's great if you need to do certification or you need an end of course grade or something. But I know somebody had asked about pre and post tests, and in general I'd say I don't think they're really that valuable to measure learning. I do find that the federal government is asking more and more for pre and post tests, but I think that's just an easy reaction to probably a little bit of pressure to show the value of training. But a pre and a post test isn't really a great way to show the value of training. I think if you craft some really good questions on an end of course evaluation or survey, it's much less time consuming, much less stressful for students to fill out. But if you do have an interest in training evaluation, I should have put it on the resources at the end, but look at the OPM field guide. It's a really great resource. So just to give you a quick overview here, let's talk for a minute about what a survey is. And basically, it's just a systematic way of collecting data from a large number of people. Like I said, I tend to think of a survey as something focused on people's opinions and perceptions, as opposed to testing the knowledge that they have or asking what level of skill they have. So I do tend to use it a little bit differently. You probably will run across people who use these terms interchangeably, but in having to deal with this day in and day out, it's easier for me to try to use the terms differently. So surveys are used in a wide variety of performance improvement steps or interventions, and in the jobs that I see you folks have in training and HR, you might be using surveys to do needs assessment, maybe some sort of diagnostic survey. So especially folks in HR and organizational development role, you might really draw heavily on a survey to try to figure out what's going on, certain performance problems, or you might have a group where things aren't going well and you're not sure why. Sometimes a survey can be a good way to gather that information. And of course, as we've talked about with evaluations, with training evaluations. So there's a lot of benefits of surveys, especially with all the different online tools that are available nowadays. Has anybody used any of these or other survey tools? Just type a note in the chat box. Be curious to know who's used what. Management Concepts, we use a tool, actually it used to be called Bovisi, it's the one on the top right here. Now it's called Verint. They were bought a couple years ago and they're rebranding. We've used Qualtrics quite a bit. We use that. We've got a couple clients who have that and we use that, and I really like that tool. SurveyMonkey I use for some of my own research, and it's actually pretty good for the low price that you have. Google has a survey tool. Oh, thanks, Matt. I'm going to have to check that out. I always learn something new. Great. And there's a lot of different tools. The FDA sounds like they've got something they use, so that's pretty cool. So the good thing is these tools are easy to find. They're pretty inexpensive. You can collect a lot of data and reach lots of people, and a lot of times it does the analysis for you. Somebody had asked a great question about a game, sort of gamifying surveys, and I haven't really seen that. The closest thing that I could think of is, I don't know if anybody is on the Harris poll panel. I'm sort of weird, so I sign up to do surveys, and it's sort of it's just a marketing company, and they email you surveys to fill out a couple times a week. And there you can build up points. So if you fill out a survey, you get points for it, and then when you get so many points, you can get like a $5 or $10 iTunes gift card or something. So that's sort of the closest thing I've seen with surveys. And I would say I'd probably want to be a little bit more transparent, not turn something into a game. I would want people to know that they're providing feedback to me. But again, people do creative things, so if you run across something, be interested to see that. The nice thing about some of this software is if you do have to do a long survey, and we'll talk about survey length in a little bit, you can save and return. You probably don't want to do a really long survey unless you have to or you have a relationship. For example, if we did a long instructor survey, we might do okay with our response rate at Management Concepts because the instructors work for us and there's something in it for them. But if it's just folks filling it out that, you know, you got a marketing list or something, you probably want to keep it pretty short. And in general, you know, you want to make it easy for people to respond. The other advantage of some of these enterprise tools like Qualtrics or Bovisi is that they have what's called panels. So it's really a database of information. So you can set up a database with different people in there. For example, in Management Concepts, we can set up a panel with our students who've taken our classes, and then we can put known information about them in there. So we might put what agency they work for, their location, things like that. And then when we do a survey, they're just answering the new questions. We don't have to ask the same questions over and over again. So that shortens the survey, which increases the response rate. And it's just you can analyze the data in a lot of different ways. So that's another advantage. The disadvantage of some of these tools is it's easy for people to go and design surveys. So a lot of, like Catherine said, you know, she'd start to work on something and she wouldn't be sure how to word something and come get help from me, which is great, but a lot of folks just start jumping into the software and writing items, and then sometimes the results aren't so good. So just because you can get into a tool doesn't mean that's the same as having survey design expertise. And the problem with that is if you have a poorly designed survey, then you may not get good data back, which means you could make a wrong decision. You're going to be wasting your time. You're going to be wasting people's time filling it out. If you're in a role like I am, that's sort of bad PR for the company. It makes you look bad. And of course, people probably won't want to fill out your surveys again in the future. So what I want to talk about tonight are 3 common hurdles and how to overcome them. So I'm following some standard logic here, sort of before, during, and after. So stating the goal, asking the right questions, and then interpreting the results. And Catherine, did you share a job aid? It looked like from the questions some folks had seen the job aid on survey writing. Well,
yes, there was the job aid that you had shared with me before. So yes, they have seen the job aid, Shelly.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I couldn't remember if I had sent that or not. And there were a couple questions about that. I put that together after numerous experiences at Management Concepts where folks would sort of be sitting around in a meeting and they'd say, oh, we need to know some information. Well, let's do a survey. And they'd start writing questions right away, but they weren't all on the same page. And then at some point they would get sort of confused and not sure what to do, so they'd come see me. So the main problem they seem to have is they just weren't sure what the purpose of the survey was. So I put together that job aid to get them to think about what they wanted to do before they started writing questions. And I usually tell folks, don't start writing questions. That's the worst thing you can do. Instead, follow the job aid and really try to get clarity on what decisions or what actions you need to take. And that seems to be helpful. And it seems sort of long. It might seem sort of seems like it's burdensome, but it actually goes pretty quick. And it is good for folks to think about who else in the company might need to be involved. Because it's just easier to CC 1 or 2 extra people on an email or have them come to a short meeting or somebody else who can review a draft survey than to just not do a good survey and not have data that's helpful. So let's dive into the first hurdle, which is stating the survey goal. So like I've been talking about, the survey goals are often not identified. Folks seem to think of a lot of information that would be helpful or nice to know, but they're not really sure what's going to happen or what they want to have happen. And sometimes that makes sense. You know, me in the survey designer role, it's hard for me to help them write good questions if I'm not the decision maker. I'm not in their shoes. So I need those decision makers to weigh in. Sometimes it's hard to design a survey if, like I said, there's maybe subject matter experts who are helping design the questions, but they're not survey experts. And again, they tend to start writing questions instead of finding a survey expert. So the way to overcome this hurdle is identify the decision or action to be taken. Sounds really easy, but sometimes it isn't that easy. Identify who the decision maker is. Another one is a survey the right tool? There was a section on the job aid that talked about finding other sources of information. And actually, I had a good example of this just a couple weeks ago. We are running some classes where instead of giving students a printed binder of materials, we're giving them an iPad with the materials on it. And we're calling these ebooks classes for short. And so we went through our usual end-of-course evaluation, and we spent a lot of time analyzing the end-of-course evaluations from those ebooks classes. And then the ebooks team asked me to come to their meeting. I sent them the job aid, and they said, we think we need to survey these students who just took these ebooks classes. And I said, okay, convince me. What do you need to find out? Because on the end-of-course evaluations, there was a lot of really great feedback. They had provided ratings. They had written just a ton of really good suggestions and ideas and things that would make the whole experience better. And they said, well, we want to know if they would take another ebooks class. And I said, well, you know, why would you ask them that? They sort of told you in their comments. There were some things that went well and other things that didn't go well. And they said, well, we think we're going to change this and tweak that and add this feature. And I said, okay, but they're not going to respond based on that. That's hypothetical. So in that case, a survey wasn't the right tool. I was wondering if it might be better to call them, do like a short phone interview, but actually we just decided against doing a survey. Instead, what they decided to do was make the changes that the student suggested, and then we'll just look at the evaluations and see if we're seeing other comments or things that we need to respond to. I've seen other examples where sometimes information is available in public domain. I think not too long ago, one of the divisions was wondering about what types of devices people had and what operating systems. That can be sort of hard for people to respond to, especially if you know, you're not really technologically savvy. Some people don't know what browser version they have, or you know, what iOS they have on their phone. But there's information in the public domain about market share for, you know, iPhones versus Androids, or Macs versus IBM PCs, or so there's other ways to get information. You don't always have to survey folks. Here's a couple examples of decisions or actions that could be taken. One that I've gotten from time to time in the past is one of our training divisions will want to plan courses for the next year so that they can start marketing and they can schedule instructors to teach those classes and find classrooms. And the middle column here is sort of a vague survey goal. So what do our students think about our classes? And then a more detailed or a better survey goal is, you know, what we really want to know is the dates and times that students want to take the classes. You know, if it's a 3-day class, do they want to come on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so they can travel on Sunday and, you know, go back Wednesday evening? Or is it better to do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so they can travel on Monday and Friday? So we can ask about some of those details. Here's another example of, you know, should we take our limited R&D budget and should we spend it more on instructor-led courses or online courses? So if we want to develop a new class, what type of course should it be? So a vague way to ask that is, would students prefer to take an instructor-led or online course? But we could get a little bit more detailed and try to figure out exactly what their preferences are, their reasons. You do learn a lot. When I've asked more detailed questions about that, you really get insights into it. And some surveys that I've done reveals that students prefer taking the instructor-led course, but then we also asked what were supervisor approved. So if we just ask students, what do you prefer, they'd say instructor-led course, and then we would invest in creating that course as an instructor-led version, and then nobody would sign up for it because their supervisor has to approve it. At least in the federal government, that's a common thing. So we asked, what will your supervisor approve? And they said, well, our supervisor won't approve an instructor-led course because then I have to be out of the office, and I might have to spend travel money, and we don't have a travel budget. So my supervisor will only let me take an online course. So that just gave us some insights into how to spend that R&D budget. Here's sort of a different example, but I think it makes the point of sort of thinking outside the box. This was the before example. A division tried drafting their own survey without a really good sense of what information they wanted. And you can see here the goal was to mine the good ideas of instructors and have them identify new topics for classes. So the instructors are on our front lines, and they see what topics are really interesting to students or they really need more of. So they had a series of questions drafted. I'll let you read through them about what courses have you taught, and what are students interested in learning more about. And so their thinking was, well, let's ask what topics, and then we'll link this to a course, because we want to see sort of what course were you teaching as an instructor when you learned about students having this interest. And they asked the same thing about topics that students have trouble with, the new or hot topics. So in the chat box, tell me what you think about this. What might be some potential pitfalls with sending a survey like this to instructors? Anything jump out at you guys? Too vague? Yeah? Oh, yeah, it would definitely be a big jumble. Too many topics. Yeah, it's really open-ended, so it's a big jumble, and then you have to try to figure out how to make sense of it. Yeah, one of the big problems that I saw with it is I'm not sure instructors would remember what they've taught. Someone's got a sense of humor, too. So what time frame? I mean, do we expect them to think back 3 years or 5 years? I don't want to rely on what on their memories, and they'll probably get the course names wrong. So it's also a lot of typing. So probably by the time they get to the second to last or the last question, no, Patty, don't worry. This wasn't really used by a client. This was the draft version, which I managed to stop in its tracks and turn it into something better. So here's some different points to think about. And once I started sort of talking through these concerns that I had, the things that are in these green boxes, it became clear to me that it probably doesn't really matter whether it was a topic that students just said they were interested in. It didn't really matter that it was a topic that students had trouble with or was just some new trend. They just wanted ideas. And it didn't really matter to link the topics to the courses. When it came down to it, all the division really wanted was just some creative new ideas. And so if you know anything about brainstorming, the more ideas you can come up with, the better. You don't want to restrict people. You don't want them to focus on typing or having to remember what course somebody said this in. You just want them to type away. So we actually did end up doing a survey, and this is what it said. I only have 2 idea lines listed here, but we had about 20 of them. And we told them that. We just said, think of as many ideas as you can. Actually, they wanted topics for one-day project management courses. And we just said, think about things they have trouble with, they want to learn more about or have trouble learning, or hot topics, and just type away. And what happened was we sent it to 50 instructors, and just over 50% response rate, 26 responded, and there were 291 ideas generated. So that was awesome. I thought that was successful. Each instructor, on average, had 11 ideas. And I guess the original thinking about linking it to courses is they wanted to sort of keep the instructors in the project management domain. They didn't want them coming up with things that weren't related to project management, but that wasn't an issue at all. They were all related to project management. The client, the division in this case, looked at the ideas, and that's what they used along with other input, things that they gathered from student ideas, from end-of-course evaluations, and the staff to make final decisions. So why don't you guys practice this in the chat box? Think of a decision, maybe at work or in a job that you've had in the past, or it doesn't even have to be job related. It can be, you know, a group that you're involved in. Share a decision and what the survey goal might be for that. Think of a decision that somebody might need to make, and type that in the box and how that might translate into a survey goal. Give you a minute to think it through and some time to type. Okay. You understand what leadership development our managers had. Okay, great. Supervisor, reading Patty's response. The online services, great. Oh, 4 new instructors. Oh, so getting a couple here with getting student input and instructor input. The surveys are great for that because those are really opinions. It's what people think about something. Great. So think about how you might take those different purposes and turn it into a survey goal. So something really specific. It's another response coming in. ILT versus web-based course. Great. Great. We'll keep typing those in as you think of more. Let's look at the second hurdle, which is asking the right questions. So by now you've specified the survey goal. You know what decision or action will need to be taken based on the survey results. Patty, there's a good, nice close-ended question. How much of your time do you spend on homework? So you want to ask the right questions. And even if you have a really good survey goal, that doesn't mean you're going to ask the right questions. But I find that once you have that survey goal, it's really easy to write questions. And that's why I tell people, don't write questions to start out with. Wait until you can specify the survey goal. So the questions are linked to the survey goal. So if you don't know what the goal is, then the questions are going to get out of hand. Maybe you need 5 or 6 questions, but people just keep adding in all these nice-to-know questions or things that sound really good in a question, but there's really no purpose to it. So we call that survey creep. Questions with unactionable results. I just want to ask this question I've got a hunch about something, but I don't really need to make a decision. And of course, biased questions. The other thing I find is that people tend to fall back on open-ended questions. So when they're really unclear about what the purpose of the survey is, I can really spot that when they suggest a bunch of open-ended questions to me. Because it just, for some reason, it's easy for people to write those. And if you can get clarity on what your purpose is, then it's easy to write a good question, and it's easier to write a closed-ended question. So some ways to navigate those obstacles. You can pilot the survey with a small group, and that probably sounds burdensome and time-consuming. But I do a variety of different things to pilot. Sometimes I just do what I call the drive-by. So I'll take my questions and I'll walk around the office and I'll grab a couple people or just seem to be sitting at their desk, and I'll say, can you read this? What does this question mean to you? Or does this question make sense to you? The more important the survey, or the more mission critical it is, then I'll be more likely to do an actual pilot with end users or people who are similar to the end users. But just piloting or bouncing the questions off of somebody is extremely valuable. The other thing you can do, and the job aid supports this, is link the questions to a survey goal. So if you're somehow going to link the question back, then that will stop you from having those nice-to-know questions in there. And if you're in the survey designer role, that will help you stop other people from adding those in. That's probably one of the the biggest challenges that I experience is people sometimes come up with these pet questions, and I have to sort of convince them that it's not really a good question to put in, or we don't need it. Another thing that is sort of good is generate some sample results. And sometimes I actually do this. I'll put together a bar chart or something, and I'll put, in one scenario, I'll put everything comes out positive, or all the results come out toward instructor-led training. And then I'll do another one with the complete opposite results. And I'll ask people, pretend that these are your results. Is this informative to you? Because what that does is it gets them thinking about, now I have to actually make a decision based on this, and is it going to do that? Or am I going to look at this at this data and say, you know, I don't think we asked it the right way. I think there's something missing here, or people maybe misinterpreted how we worded this. And you know, you want to do that ahead of time, of course, rather than after the fact. The final tip is, when in doubt, ask a direct question. So I find that sometimes people try to write questions in a certain way because they think they're following rules for writing survey items, but a lot of times it's just they come up with something and I'll say, okay, you're asking this, and because you want to know that, you're asking about X and Y because you want to know about X and Y, and they say, no, I actually want to know about A and B. So you just ask a direct question. If you want to know what day of the week is it best for you to take a class, then ask that. Don't ask, you know, so what would be your preference about timing of the class? Because that can be interpreted in different ways. Some people might think do you want to know if it starts at 7:30 in the morning or 8:30 in the morning? Do you want to know what time of year? There's a lot of different ways to interpret that. Somebody had asked about leading questions, and I think there's really good, I'm not going to talk too much about it because there's really good advice that you can read online. That's in some of the resources I have at the end. And they've got tons of really great examples of, you know, a poorly worded question or a leading question and then a better way to ask it. But my advice, again, is pilot it, or just at a minimum, get other people to read the question. So, you know, they'll tell you if something just, maybe they won't say it's a leading question, but they'll say something doesn't sound right about this question. Probably the biggest question that I get, and some of the challenges that I have, like I said, people always want to ask open-ended questions, and sometimes those are good. I really like them. You know, if you've got a closed-ended question, I like them as a follow-up. You know, make sure you have an opt-out response. So your closed-ended question, and you've got, say, 4 response options, but you still might have forgotten about something. You know, if it's how much of your time during a week do you spend on homework, and your response options are 0 hours, 1 hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours, you've forgotten about 4 hours or 5 hours. That one you're probably going to catch, but there's other options that people might have responses that you just didn't include in your list. So you can just put an other and have them write in. Or if you really do want more detailed comments, you can put, you know, please explain your response. And that's really good sometimes on end-of-course evaluations. So we've done ones where we'll say, if you gave this a negative rating, just explain your response. We want to know what's going on. Sometimes open-ended questions are helpful if the respondents need to vent. Sometimes on customer satisfaction surveys. I did a custom culture survey a few years ago for a client, and this workforce had been through a lot. It was just a really toxic work environment, and they'd had some negative incidents occur, and management really genuinely wanted to turn things around. And they wanted to collect some data. This was a scientific organization, so to change anything in a scientific organization, you sort of got to be data-driven. But we did ask a lot of open-ended questions on that because it was cathartic for those folks. They wrote a ton, the longest responses I've ever seen, And not only was that helpful to see all the different perspectives and viewpoints, but I think it was useful for the employees. The other thing you can do in a pilot is you can ask some open-ended questions in a short pilot survey, and then based on what people are telling you or what themes you're seeing, then you can use that to construct the closed-ended responses. And somebody had asked about gathering anecdotes, and that's another really good use of an open-ended question. Gather anecdotes that you can use to market a training program, for example. It's always helpful to put in actual student comments about the course. Looking at the closed-ended column, closed-ended, I think that's your bread and butter for doing surveys. You get consistent responses. People are pretty much reading it and answering it the same way. They're seen as less biased. The software analyzes it for you. It's cost-effective. It's quick for people to fill out, which helps your response rate. Sometimes folks say, well, I don't want to bias them with telling them the answers, and I wouldn't worry at all about that. As long as you're constructing a properly worded, closed-ended question, you're not going to have biased results. If someone's saying, well, I don't want to bias the responses, then they don't know what the purpose is of the survey. Or I suspect sometimes it's a defense mechanism that they don't really want to know what the answers are. And on that note, here's an example. This is hypothetical, but it's still pretty realistic. What do you think about the course? So you can read the responses here. There's things about cost, the hotel, and there was an error on slide 12. So write in the chat box, what are the drawbacks of this question? What would you conclude, or what decisions would you make based on that? Could you make decisions? Yeah, Gina says it's not specific. Yeah, not much you can do. Yeah, you can update slide 12. That's about it. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to interpret that. So it was good. Well, does that mean this was like just a fantastic course, or it was good, it was so-so? Yeah, Denise, I hope I'm saying your name the right way. The responses could be viewed as negative, but you're going to get some people who say, no, it was positive. People said it was good, it was okay, they were happy with it. So yeah, the interpretation is very subjective. So the risks here, you're going to get a low topic response rate, right? So one person commented about an error on the slide. One person commented about the hotel. I think somebody commented on the instructor. And do you really want to make a decision based on what one person said about the instructor? Now, yeah, it only takes one person to say there was an error on slide 12. You can check that. But people have different mindsets. Some people thought you were asking about the course. Some people about the whole experience of going to take the class. It's hard to compare, it was good, it was okay. Are those sort of the same? Is good better than okay? You don't know. So hard to take action. Now let's look at sort of the same question. We've turned this into 3 closed-ended questions now. So tell us about your experiences in the course. The instructor was knowledgeable, and we've got a rating scale here that they filled out from 1 to 5. The materials were accurate, and the classroom was conducive to learning. What would you conclude here? Could you take any action based on this closed-ended way of asking it? Yeah, change the course materials. Yep, it's a little bit easier to see what you need to change and what you're doing well in, too. So you might want to change the materials and tell the instructor that she's doing a great job. So I also get a lot of questions about response scales, and what I would suggest is steal. Don't reinvent. Take others' good scales that they've put together in the past. These are all commonly used scale items. You can Google rating scale or survey rating scales, and you get a ton of pretty good stuff that pops up. So wherever possible, steal rating scales. It's harder than you think to write scales that have the same psychological distance between the different scale points. It is really, it's harder than it seems like it would be to come up with ones where the 5 point is higher than the 4 point, which is higher than the 3 point. As Catherine mentioned at the beginning, a lot of times people say any 5-point scale is a Likert scale. Does anyone know which of these scales is actually a Likert scale? You can type it in, just type in example 1, 2, or 3, and which row. Is it agreement, frequency, importance, quality? This is the hard question for the evening. Agreement, example 2. Okay. Walter, good guess. Frequency 1. Agreement 3. All right, it's the agreement 3. And it can be a 7-point scale. But this is from Rensis Lakert's opinion research way back, I think, the 1950s. He was a pioneer in the field of opinion research, and he would state things as statements. So it would be, I like broccoli, and you would choose strongly agree, agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree or strongly agree. Like I said, there's a 7-point version of that, which is a Likert scale. So it's not the number of scale points, but it's this specific way of wording the response options. One of my pet peeves, and like I said, I'm a little odd, but I see people sort of butcher this response scale in all kinds of different ways. I see neutral for that middle response option, which I call a gear on a car, or I see mixed, which is a type of drink, or undecided, which really makes no sense to me at all. It's not that I can't decide, it's just I don't really care about broccoli. I don't like it one way or another. It doesn't matter to me. So, you do want to put an opt-out option in some survey items, but I tend not to put them when I'm asking people's opinions, especially if they just took a training course. They should have an opinion. You sort of want to force them into having an opinion. It's okay if they're in the middle of this scale. Maybe if you're saying the instructor facilitated my learning, I can see how they're going to put neither agree nor disagree, but that's still an opinion. And if you are asking them something like, the temperature in the room was adequate and they don't really care, then they won't answer the question. All right. I thought this was a really fun example. The question wording should match the response options. As you start to draft survey items, sometimes you can get a little off track. You can revise a question and you forget to change the response scale. But this was a funny example I ran across. Again, in the resources that I provided, there's a ton of really good examples that are even better than this about how to write good survey questions. So let's do this. Let's do another little practice activity. Think of a survey item. If it's related to that goal you picked, that's great. Doesn't have to be. How might you ask a question? So if you wanted to know about how much time they spent on homework, how might you ask that? Or other folks were asking about ILT versus online. Give you a minute to think about it. Yeah, I have the skills required to do my job. And do you think you would want to put yes, no? What would the response options be, Walter? And apply what I learned. Good. Yep, yeah, that would work for a Likert scale since it's a statement. Yep, that's a good idea. Good, Gina. Yeah, make sure you steal those response options. Don't rewrite your own. A lot of times when we do marketing surveys, we want them to be really engaging. I think actually somebody really good comment about, I've never done a fun survey. Are there any fun surveys? I've tried to do that, and it's really tough. Sometimes we'll put a short little 3 or 4 item survey together that we'll have people at a conference fill out. But it's hard to write fun response options too, especially if you do want to get some kind of useful data back. So sometimes they tend not to be so fun, and I think the only way you can counteract that is to be really clear about what your purpose is. Share with the respondents. You can put this in survey instructions, but share with them why you're doing this. Make them feel that you're going to act on the results. Don't just say, here, answer these questions. All right. So let's look at the third hurdle. So we've written some good questions. Those are linked back to a survey goal that we can take action on. Now we get the data back, and we have to take action. So sometimes the results can be misinterpreted or not interpreted at all. So the respondents can read the question differently than we intended. And the way to fix that, like I said, is to pilot it or at least get people to read it. And they can talk out loud and say, this is how I'm interpreting this question, and that will hopefully head that off. The responses are actionable. Same thing, if you get feedback and you're linking it back to a decision, hopefully you increase the chance that action can be taken. I'll give an example of this third bullet here, where me as the survey designer, I'm not a subject matter expert. So sometimes it can be hard for me to interpret the results, and I have to rely on a subject matter expert to help me do that. So that's why you want to identify those folks early in the survey design or include them on the survey team. And finally, there's management pushback. There's resistance. Sometimes management doesn't understand the results, or they don't like what they hear, and they're just unwilling to take action. But I generally have a rule that I don't want to do a survey or any type of assessment unless somebody's going to take action on it, because then you're just wasting people's time. And students know, even students in our classes, we get a lot of repeat customers, and they know when we listen to them and when things have changed. Probably the number one question I get is about response rate. What's a good response rate? And that depends completely on the type of survey and what your relationship is with the audience. So if we're just going to do a little marketing survey, we're going to send it out to 40,000 past students who've taken our class. Or maybe you can rent mailing lists. Maybe we send it out to 60,000 people who are on an association mailing list. If I get 2 or 3% back, I'm really happy. Now, other types of surveys, if we get 2 or 3% back, I won't be so happy. If we're doing employee surveys, so if we're doing a competency assessment for a client, that's a client who's paid us to do a competency assessment or to do a custom culture survey or some other sort of employee survey. And they want to get the data back from their workforce. So again, that's when I talk about, explain the purpose. If it's something like a competency assessment, we do a whole communication plan. We have an executive in the client group send an email explaining to the workforce why they need to fill this out, how it's going to be useful to them, addressing any concerns that they have. Sometimes we do orientation sessions so people can come and hear about the survey or the assessment we're doing. We have a little briefing we go through. Sometimes those are live or in person. Sometimes they're webinars, or we've even recorded them. But when we do that, we get over 80% response rate. And then usually in the 30 to 60% range for different types of customers or student surveys. We just implemented online evaluation for all our open enrollment classes, and we're at about 65 or 70% response rate. We have one of our divisions that for some reason they've got a really close relationship with their customers, with their students. I think they rely a lot on a certificate program, so it's not just students who come every now and then and take a class, but they take a whole series of classes with us to get a certificate. And that group, because of that close relationship, they are always the highest response rate of any division. Some things you can do to improve response rates. Keep it short, fewer than 20 items or questions. I've seen stats that say 7 or 8 questions gets you the maximum response rate. But again, don't view that as a hard and fast rule. It really depends on the type of survey. Carrots, giveaways or drawings sometimes help. We've done those in the past for our marketing surveys, and I think it boosts it up a little bit, but I don't think it does it a lot. But the number one thing is promising to act on the results. So, making sure that people see why their input is important and that you're going to take it seriously. Of course, more data is always better, but I don't want to do things that's going to boost the response rate, but it's going to give me bad data. Gina's asking a great question. Low response rate, is that a reason to not interpret the data? Yeah, Gina, I think it depends. If it's the marketing survey, 2 or 3% is low, but that's still valuable input. And if you can triangulate, if you could take the survey results from a 2 to 3% marketing survey and combine it with other information or combine it with some focus groups that you've done with students, and you're seeing the same things, then you're going to feel more confident that you're making the right decision. I did an assessment once. It was a competency assessment for a client, and they had a 100% response rate. The problem is I sort of worried about what they had to do to get a 100% response rate. I was worried that people were just not being careful in filling that out just because somebody was breathing down their neck that you must fill this out. The same thing with our online evaluations. We recently switched from the old Scantron, the paper evaluations, right, filling in the little circles with the number 2 pencil, and went to online evaluations. And there was a lot of concern about, well, we've got a 99.9% response rate with the paper evaluations, and that's going to go down. And it took a lot of work to convince folks that that's okay. We're still going to get plenty of actionable feedback. There's still going to be plenty of things for us to work on and improve on. So, I'm more concerned about the quality of information than the response rate most of the time. Probably a couple exceptions to that. If you're doing a survey to, it's presidential election time, right? We've all seen those exit polls or the polls of how you're going to vote in the next election, and you always see the +2 or 3 percentage points. That's an example where you need to have a certain degree of accuracy. There probably are some cases where you need to collect some survey data to make some sort of mission-critical decision or forecast. An HR example maybe is, will you sign up for this new benefit plan if we offer it? Maybe you want that to be a little bit more accurate, so you want people to fill it out. But most of the time, I find in training and doing assessments, people just need to have a general idea of where people's opinions are and how things are falling out. Some things that you'll find as a survey designer when it comes to interpreting the responses is that people do have questions about non-response. So, you need to be armed to counter that. Something that I've used in the past is done sort of a quick analysis or calculation to say, okay, if I've got a 60% response rate, let's say I surveyed 100 people and 60 of them responded, and it said, yeah, I love this new course, or, I love the idea of having this extra benefit in our benefits plan. If you can come up with some hypothetical examples of, okay, 60 people just love it, do we really think that the other 40 people hate it? And it's probably not that likely. Maybe not everybody was as positive about this, but you're probably not going to have something that's completely split. If people felt that strongly about it, they'd probably be responding. So, that's just sort of another way to look at it, is if the response rate were higher, do you really think we would see something different? Or is there some logical reason why people who would feel negative about this wouldn't respond? There's lots of good reasons why people just don't respond. Of course, poor timing. They're busy at work. They're on vacation, things like that. I've seen response rates response rates be low because the client hasn't taken action in the past. You've probably experienced this in your jobs too. I've talked to clients who say, no, not another survey. They keep asking us this stuff and nothing changes. And I agree with them actually. I get tired of filling stuff out if nothing changed. Of course, the survey takes too much time. So, you want to keep it short, close-ended, much faster for people to fill out. Every now and then you get technical issues, especially with a government population. Sometimes there's issues with agency firewalls or just internet connectivity or old browsers or things. So it's hard for people to fill out online surveys, but that's a fraction of 1%, I think. So if you can try to, again, in the survey instructions or even the email that you send with the survey, try to anticipate what concerns people might have. But why might they not want to answer? And then try to address those. So again, involve experts. That's your survey team. Just have other people weigh in. Try to get a commitment in advance. Executives and management usually is responsive when you say, this is sort of going to make you or make us look bad if we ask these questions. It sets the expectation that you're asking for feedback because you want to make a change. Triangulating your results. So collecting other data is really something I highly recommend. I think even the best designed survey is not going to answer all the questions. So it's going to give you a sense of, should you lean in this direction or that direction, but it's not going to answer everything. So if you can collect other data, even if it's anecdotal, if you're trying to get student opinions on something, call up a couple instructors and say, what are you hearing from students? How do you think they feel about this? Or talk to the staff. At Management Concepts, we have staff in our training facility, and they talk to students all day long. They know sort of what the buzz is and what people are feeling about things. And then finally, take that action, and if you can, report back. And that's not always feasible, especially with a marketing survey or something, but if it's an opinion survey or a competency assessment, there's opportunity to make sure people get some feedback. So a lot of times organizations do take action based on survey results, but they don't close the loop for people. Organizations don't say, we asked for your input and we heard you, we listened, and then we made this change. Sometimes they just make the change, and it's hard for people to put 2 and 2 together and say, oh, this change was made because of our feedback. So if you can make that link, that's helpful. Again, try to show or communicate that you took action, and sometimes you can't take action. You don't want to ask questions about things that you're not willing to act on, but sometimes people spontaneously say, I think you really need to do this. Sometimes our students will put, I think you need to give us a free gourmet lunch every day of the week because we paid a lot of money for this class. Okay, but we're probably not going to do that, and that leads to government ethics issues and things. So if you can, say, we heard you, but here's why we couldn't take action. Sometimes decision makers are just, they're, like I said, they're afraid of the bad results or the negative results, but try to make them feel that the survey's not going to slam them. That's what they need to do. They need to get the honest feedback so they can take action. Here's this example I was talking about. This is a project management competency assessment, so a little bit different from an opinion survey. But we asked employees to rate themselves on a bunch of different project management competencies. They rated their proficiency level on a 1 to 5 scale, and then we collapsed those competencies into these different areas here. So what do you see in this chart? Type in the text box. Where do you think the strengths are and where the improvement areas are? Here they are, sort of close. If you had to pick one, what would be the strongest one, do you think? Yeah, Kristen, you've got a good point. On a competency assessment, we set standards. So we set a goal or a benchmark where people want to be. Planning, yeah, Patty, do you think planning is a strength or something they can improve on because it's low? Yeah, we would assume, yeah, as a non-project management expert, okay, thanks, Patty. As a non-project management expert, I would say initiating the project would be a strength. So this is a great example of why I recognize or try to recognize what I don't know and worked with a project management expert in interpreting this assessment. And when he looked at these results, he came up with something very different and actually a lot more complex than, hey, you're doing great on initiating and not so great on planning. So this is a complex chart. We're not going to go over the whole thing, but how he interpreted these results were that initiating the project is where their weakness is, that those low ratings at these subsequent project management steps were because they didn't properly initiate the project. So he viewed it as, here's a series of steps you go through in a project. You have to initiate it and plan it and execute it, and monitor and control it, and then you can close it out. And some of these low ratings in, I've got to flip back here a second, low ratings in planning and monitoring and controlling were problems that were popping up because it hadn't been properly initiated. And this is with a private sector client. It was a Fortune 500 company. And he explained this to them in a much better way than I can do it. But when he explained it to them as an expert, they were just absolutely floored. They said, look, you guys are doing this assessment. You've never stepped foot into one of our offices or facilities, but somehow you've described us perfectly. It just resonated with their own observations and experiences, but yet we had data to back up that that's what was going on. So even in opinion surveys, if you can get people to help you interpret, that's good. I do things like that all the time. I take something and I just, like I said, I walk around the office and I grab people, or I say, you know, I want to grab somebody in this department because this is more relevant, they'll know more about this, and help me figure out what's going on. And that is sort of a standard approach in some surveys, like in culture assessments. A lot of organizations will do an organizational culture assessment, and it'll come out and say, you know, you guys are high on communication and low on decision making and things like that. And then you have to put together a little focus group of employees to say, okay, when it says we're low on decision making, what does that really mean? And they'll give you anecdotes. And that will help you interpret and help you turn those lower scores into things that you can act on. So you can work through this on your own time. What I want to do is make sure we have enough time for questions. And this would probably be a great time to open up the phone lines. Here's a couple frequently asked questions I'll let you read through. So the phone lines are opening. Anonymity, I'll talk about anonymity. That's a really good question. I never use the word anonymous with a survey, or at least an online survey, because if you do have certain technical skills, which I don't have, but some people do, yeah, I can track the IP address that you filled out the survey from and know that that's your computer. It's technically possible. So I'm always very careful to say that we promise confidentiality and that we will keep the results confidential. But some surveys, our clients don't want confidentiality. So as long as we know that up front and we can tell people that, you know, here's what is going to happen with your data, they're generally okay with that.
Shelly, I see that Catrice has a question mark, and it's been on there for some time. Catrice, I don't know if you still have a question and would like to ask it at this time.
No, I don't have a question. I must have hit that by accident. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Oh, I didn't even notice that till you said that. That's pretty cool.
Patty has written something here. We're building leadership standard learning objectives. However, they will be customized. One manager wanted to know where to begin, what to focus on. I asked the question, what do you want to learn, or what do you want to know, learn from them? Thoughts? It's not a survey per se, but could be.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would say work through the job aid. So let me think that you're building leadership standard learning objectives. So you might want to do some kind of needs assessment to see what the learning objectives should be. I'm not sure if that's relevant to what you have in mind. But Patty, definitely think about follow a format of survey. Yeah, so you could probably apply some of the survey advice to filling out a form. I would say bounce it off as many people as you can, or have them fill it out and see what's clear or unclear. Catherine, are the phone lines open yet?
Hi, this is Catrice again. Now I do have a question.
Yeah.
My question is, recently my team and we developed a training for 6,000 plus employees. And right now we're in the process of doing the survey. But my only problem is that out of the 6,000 that are required to take the training, only about 2,500 has taken the training thus far. Now, is it best to do the survey at the end once everyone has completed the training, or can we release it to those who have already taken the training thus far? Like, when is the best time to release a survey for that many people when people have taken the training at various times?
Oh, that's a great question. So it's going to take you probably a while to train 6,000 people, right?
Training they have a deadline. The training was launched on September 30th, and everybody is mandated to complete the training by November 15th. So,
okay.
yeah, so it was a mandate training that everybody has to take by November 15th.
Okay, and you want them to fill out a survey, like a training evaluation survey after they take the training?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
As soon as they're done with that training, I would get that training evaluation survey to them. If you can, if it's, I don't know if it's online or probably with that many people, I would guess it would be online. If you can put it into like the end of the training or the link to the eval survey at the end of the training, or, you know, depending on what your capabilities are, or, you know, if there's a record in an LMS that says Joe Smith completed the training, and then you can tell it, okay, now send the evaluation.
Okay.
Get it as soon as possible, because people forget. And you want good data. So, you know, the sooner they can give you their feedback, the better it will be, the better the response rate will be. With our online evals that we're doing now, we send it the morning of the last day of the class, and we only leave it open for 7 days. And every now and then we get a student who, you know, 8 days later, they call us up and they say, I'm trying to fill out my evaluation, and it won't let me. And we say, that's because it's closed. And they say, I really want to provide feedback. I was out of town. Like, you know, thanks a lot, but I don't want feedback after 8 days. You forget. We do, or I do a customer satisfaction survey, and we survey a sample of our students every quarter. And every now and then a student will say, oh, I didn't like this instructor at all. And they'll name a name, and our staff looks at every comment on there, and they say, this instructor doesn't even teach for us. They've never taught for us. So I think they've taken classes from our competitors, and they forget what's what. So the sooner you can get it, the better.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. But, I mean, I like to break rules, too. So, you know, sometimes there are situations where, for some reason, you can't send it. For example, we do on-site classes in addition to open enrollment classes. So we'll go to a client site, and we'll train 25 of their employees. And sometimes the client doesn't know who's going to be in that class because they advertise it as just sort of come in and take this class. And we don't have the student names until a day or two after the class ends. Well, that's not ideal, but I'm still going to send them the survey as soon as I can, even if it's a couple days later, because I still want feedback. And I'm probably not going to get as many detailed comments, but I'll still get some useful feedback.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you.
All right, it looks like we probably have time for one more question. All right, Shelly, this just means that you did a really thorough job of addressing questions along the way. I just want to thank you so much. You know, it doesn't matter how many times I hear you present. I learn something new each time, and of course the questions from everybody on the line and through chat are always so helpful. So, Shelly, thank you so much. I know I've learned a lot again tonight, and I want to thank everyone for joining. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you online.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening to me for so long this evening. Thanks for your great questions and being a really engaged audience.
Thank you.